Okay. All right. Good evening. Welcome to the Policy Committee meeting, July 28th. I looked at the wrong number here. Has the meeting been properly posted, Julie?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. And now would be the opportunity for public comment. Do we have any this evening? Seeing none? Okay. Thank you. And then we will move into, we do have one action item, several discussion items. First action item other than the policy is the minute approval for the June Policy Committee meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Patrick.
Second.
Seconded by Greg. Any questions on the minutes? Not all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, thank you. Okay, we have a policy committee, a policy meeting on policy 0167.3, public comment at board meetings. Over the weekend, Kelly sent some information to Joe and myself, and we looked at it, and we were pleased that we were able to digest it and pass it on to the rest of you as we viewed that we were not involved with any kind of a quorum messing around with that, because we sent it to you respective of the fact that we would not carry on any conversations about it. She put together some very interesting information, should help us make a certain number of revisions in here, and I think you all received a copy of that. And I think the easiest thing for me to suggest is that we let you just take it, Kelly, and we've got roughly four pieces, right?
Four items.
4 pieces in here. I'm struggling to get to the right piece of paper here for a minute. And that will allow us to go through each of those specific areas as they fit currently in the policy and as they could possibly be revised. This is a statement of revisions. So if you're ready, I'll let you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to submit all of these items together. Also, I want to thank Julie and Dr. Cook for being flexible and putting this into an edited version of the policy so we can compare them. So as I was going through this, there were 4 particular areas that I wanted to address, and I tried to be as clear as possible. Let me highlight the 4, and then we can go through them individually. One is the need or not to announce addresses. Addresses in Waukesha County can get pretty long, and they are captured in the minutes. And so there was some discussion last time about having minors not share or have those addresses printed in the minutes. So my recommendation is simply just to not ask people to state their addresses. I'll give you just some personal context around that, as there have been times when, as a community member, my husband and I were both speaking at the same meeting. And I think, if you're both someplace else and you're telling people where you live on a live internet stream, that there could potentially be some risk associated with that. So that's coming from a position of just some personal reflection, as well as some feedback that I had from community members as well. And since those addresses are in the meeting minutes, I didn't think it was necessary for us to spend time doing that.
I have something to add to that, because from community, I actually had a couple of people address me, telephone or whatever, with a similar concern, because quite simply, some of the people didn't want to give out their address because they were afraid. Based on some of the behaviors they had encountered here, they were afraid. So, and we have the information we need to have, and I understand what you're saying. So.
And now, to be clear, I was really addressing the announcement of the address, but if there's some concern about even the publishing of the addresses, and I think that might be a requirement that we publish it, but I'm...
Is that true, Joe?
Yeah, we have the sign-up form for that purpose.
Okay.
Another thing with that is that in letter A there, or let's see, letter B, it does say any individual having a legitimate interest may comment during the board meeting. So it's not like they have to live here. It used to be that way, but that's changed, so that's just another reason to go with what you're recommending, so.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that was part of the reason to announce the address was to verify that someone was living in
And
the.
that was changed a few years ago, yeah.
Any other discussion on item number 1 that, it's pretty clear cut, but. Kelly? Pat, did you?
Thank you.
Oh,
I'm good with it.
The second one was around time allotted for comments. So I was recommending simply to strike and replace item E with the text that's included. I'm sorry, to addend item E with the text that's included that speakers should plan to deliver a message in 2 to 3 minutes when the number of speakers would be 6 or less, and I'll explain why I picked that. Speakers would be notified at 3 minutes, but allowed up to 5 minutes to complete their comments. Since we do allocate up to 30 minutes as stated in the policy, I think just as we may shorten time if we have a lot of speakers, it may not be appropriate for us to just cut somebody off abruptly at 3 minutes when we have 2 or 3. I don't know if 5 minutes is the right amount. I don't know if it's just giving them a minute to finish their comments or their thoughts. The reason I said 6 or less was just simply so that we wouldn't overrun the 30-minute window. Related to this, I just wanted to comment, though, too, is that sometimes, or at least recently, we've had people kind of come in at the last minute and want to speak. And one of the items in here does say that we want people to sign up before the meeting starts, and so that would require that we have everybody signing up to speak before the meeting starts. And if we know that there's only 3 or 4 people speaking, then we could be a little more flexible in terms of cutting them off. But I think the recommendation is that people plan for the 2 to 3 minutes because you can't ever anticipate how crowded it's going to be. But it was just more of a courtesy to the community members.
other questions about, I don't know also whether it should be 4 minutes or 5 minutes, and I'm not going to lose any sleep over that one for now. I was somewhat confused, but I think you straightened it out in your conversation there on one thing. So we are going to basically continue to tell people we're speaking about a 3-minute period. It's really an overflow if that person has it, we're trying to protect. Okay, because I didn't want people writing at home, writing their notes and thinking they had 5 minutes.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. That wouldn't be the intent. I suppose there's the possibility that someone wings it and they filibuster the 5 minutes, but
I know, but if we've got a room full, it will be 3 minutes or less, depending on the situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So whether it's 4 or 5, from my perspective, I just felt like it would be courteous.
Patrick?
We want to move the 30-minute limit up so all the times are together. Because the 30 limit is K.
Forgot.
So you could be reading this and not know that we restrict it to 30 minutes until you get to K.
Right.
Oh,
That's a great suggestion.
So I don't know if we should switch and have all the times in one.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to search through.
that could be built right into this number 2.
Yeah, it could be, that's what I think. I mean, we could move it.
It could be left where it is, but it could also be built into number 2.
Yeah, so everybody knows, so they don't have to read through to K. They know instantly, oh, it's 30 minutes. 30 minutes are allotted, so that's why we're doing this like this.
Yeah, but this would be a good
Good time to change that or move it or.
modification.
Yeah.
Thanks, Patrick. Further questions on number 2?
Okay. So the third one was the direction of comments, and this is related to item G. And we had talked about last time the kind of the redundancy of items G and I in the policy. So the intent with this suggestion would be to strike item G in its entirety. That's the one that says comments should be directed to the board and not to the staff and other participants. But to replace item I with the new language that's indicated here, that says speakers would be requested to direct comments to the board, specifically the presiding officer of the board or board committee, and should not address or question board members individually or direct comments to staff, administration, or members of the audience. And then in the interest of time, board members will not respond to speakers during public comment. So there's really nothing new in that language, but it was an attempt to pull G and I together with a little more consistency.
That's correct. Any questions on this? And when we get to putting it, if this is approved, and if we get to putting it back together, we may have to change the numbers, the letters appropriately. That's just a technical fix.
Okay.
Anthony's.
Yes, I have a question, excuse me, about that. In reading this, does that mean that any speaker that got up could not say an individual's name in administration or in the board? If there's an issue that's come up, and maybe I just need to be clarified on this, where they're speaking to a specific issue, maybe the only person they know to speak to is that one person, and without doing so, the issue doesn't get across? Or is it something that can be submitted afterward? Or I guess, what is the intent? What are we trying to protect here, I guess, is my question. I mean, because that's in the original thing, addressing, board members individually or any person. So maybe Dr. Cook could help me. What was the intent there originally, or what are we trying to not allow to happen?
Well, under the old language, the intent was to keep all the comments going to the committee chair, that there was, no discussion around any interaction because of the public meetings, rules and everything like that, open meetings law. Boards can't respond and they can't be in a position where there's a dialogue. So, with that, it was directed at the chair, take your 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and then move forward. One of the drafts, we recommended changing shall to should, which shall means you must do it. Should means it's like a suggestion. It's a request that you do it. Sure. And I think that this just further, Dr. Piasek, I think it just further, strengthens that we're just requesting you make that.
Okay.
You can't foresee a penalty for saying Dr. Siebert, Dr. Cook, Mr. Baumgart, that.
Sure. Okay.
And this was my attempt at just a compromise. So, as Dr. Cook said, I included the word requested, not required. I think that this policy would be fine if this item weren't there, because I don't have a problem with, maybe pepping up the audience is not a good idea, but generally speaking, I don't have a problem with how those comments are directed if they're directed at me. But that was an attempt at a compromise that would just be softer.
Okay.
I think you can go to.
All right. I left the best one for last. Yeah. Okay. So the last one, what I had noticed when I read the last draft is there was a sentence kind of added in an awkward spot. So I wanted to pull out, let me just get item 5 here. So we had crossed out the item J5 that said waive these rules. I think we all agreed that we were going to take that out. And I thought replacing 5 with a note about suspension of speaker privileges, because we had kind of tried to tuck it in someplace else and it didn't really make sense. What I have included here is that the presiding officer may recommend to suspend an individual from speaking at future board or committee meetings as a result of egregious or repeated disruptive behavior or offensive language. And then, I don't know if you want me to read it all in detail, or if you can read it.
Probably have all read it all.
The suspension, so there would be some new rules introduced here that I think would be up for discussion. And so the recommendation is that, suspensions would also be something that we would approve either by the board or the committee that was involved in the incident. In the event of a suspension, that the speaker would also be informed of the length of that suspension, which should be reasonable. I made a suggestion that shouldn't exceed 6 months and that should be part of the discussion. unless a vote would indicate otherwise, or there would be something through legal proceedings that would determine otherwise. And then a clarification, someone who would, a suspended speaker would be permitted to submit written comments, which I think is important for us continuing to allow the speech if there's not participation. And then in the absence of a physical safety concern, a suspended speaker would not be barred from attending meetings. And I don't know if these are required here in this policy or if these rules might be better seating someplace else.
You mean to be included in this policy?
If the rules around the action.
I don't believe we had the rules before.
Not had anything in policy that talks about what, a penalty would be for, lack of a better word, disorderly behavior at a board meeting.
But I don't see a reason not to have it here.
Policy standpoint.
So are we envisioning with number 5 that you could be suspended from, say, speaking at TNL, but not the full board meeting? And then if you are suspended from the full board meeting, are you suspended from all committee meetings as well? If the majority of the board approves your suspension, that means that you can't speak at committee meetings because it's the majority of the board. But if a committee restricts you, that does no influence on whether or not you can speak.
Yeah, I can give you my perspective,
Yes.
but I would be open to other people's perspective. I mean, I think it should apply broadly.
Broadly, such as if I suspended someone from F&F, they couldn't speak anywhere?
Well, not, I mean,
Anywhere within the confines of our meetings.
I would say yes.
I think so.
Kind of to that, one thing I thought that was perhaps would need to be amended is the length of it. Because like you say, if we have someone in finance committee that gets suspended and they're suspended from speaking, I mean, people come and speak at a different committee about something that happened at the previous board meeting or whatever. I think that probably the length of time should be shorter, so we're not penalizing someone for such a long period of time. If they have a real concern and issue they need to bring to us speaking, I don't know if it's a month or 2 months or 3 months, but I think that's plenty to punish. Now, if it's a recurring thing, maybe that's something that needs to be discussed. If it's every time the person comes, they're always disruptive, they're always out of line, then maybe the board needs to take that up and make that a much longer period. But for the offenses that have occurred since I've been here, which to me seem minor, I would say those are short.
Well, it says to
Suspensions.
not exceed 6 months, though. We could easily make it a month.
would be less.
I think that's purposely done.
That was the intent of that language, yeah.
But so then how does the board decide, or how does each committee decide? Do they go into a closed session?
So,
and-
yeah, so that goes to my point about if a committee, so this is the issue I have. If an F&F, someone says something and they get suspended, you're having 3 people, because that's the quorum of the committee, decide who speaks anywhere in the board meetings. That's a problem for me. So I could see that committee saying, hey, you're not going to speak at our committee, but I don't think that 3 people should be able to restrict somebody from speaking at a board meeting
I think
or
that's
at
really good
TNL or at any of the other committees. I can understand how maybe I want to restrict somebody from, because they're abusive or whatever at my committee, but I don't think I should have, or 2 other people that might vote with me, have the authority to restrict somebody from going to TNL and discussing something about some curriculum of their child or something. That's my concern about.
It's an excellent point that I hadn't considered.
yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense because you would have only a minority of the full board.
You would have, yes, and that's right, exactly.
That makes sense.
I think if that occurs, I'm sorry.
Go on, please go ahead.
I think if that occurs, like you said, in a committee where there's 3 people and action needs to be taken, it should be moved to the full board to make that decision at the next meeting or whatever, and then they decide, and Because it wouldn't, like you say, I don't think.
Yeah,
it
no,
would
I
be
agree.
fair.
I don't necessarily, and the issue that I have with that is I may want to hear from that person in my committee. So if the issue is solved by T&L not allowing that individual to speak, might as well do it committee by committee, because I may want to hear from him. Unless it's an issue that he's, or she is creating large problems that we want to restrict him or her from that. But I don't want T&L to restrict me from listening to a constituent.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I don't think that T&L wants their ability to listen to a constituent restricted by me and two other people. You know what I mean?
agree.
That's the problem that I have. I mean, I think that we could do it. I mean, I've never had, and I've been, on the board a long time, and I've never had any reason to restrict somebody from speaking at technology or HR or F&F or T&L, because I've been heads of all those. I've never.
Very good. You have your hand up.
Even though, as I read it says, they could
Your microphone?
they could still commit or submit written comments to the committee chair.
Yeah.
That would be communication.
No, I know, but I just don't want to restrict your ability to hear somebody by banning them at my committee, because that's what it would be. And I like to hear from people more than I like to read.
Well,
I mean, I like it when people stop me in a grocery store and say, hey, this is the deal, this is what I got, rather than writing, because I like to hear the inflection in their voice and see them.
Right.
true.
And they can still do
and that's
that.
an art that is dwindling in our
I
society.
thought I heard something in Anthony's comments. If something were to happen at a committee meeting and you really have an issue with it, I got the impression you were saying you could bring it to the board, the full board, for determination on committee-wide.
Right.
Sorry.
And I think to Pat's point, we don't want a small portion of the board making a big decision for everyone. I think this should only happen by the full board in a very egregious circumstance. I think the problem we're having is that there's currently people barred from speaking, that it's been arbitrarily done. So now we have people that cannot speak, and that has been set arbitrarily. And I think what this policy is trying to do is, if we're going to put it on paper, let's put it on paper. I personally would like to see really nobody banned from speaking, unless there's such a disruption and they break so many of our rules that it's just not constructive. I mean, I think that's the way it should be. Now, how we get there, I think this is a good start.
Yeah. So,
So I don't want to. I don't at a committee level want to restrict any other committee from hearing.
yeah,
from a
and I would say there's another thing we should consider. If you have somebody you want to speak at the meeting, I don't know if there's a way to put that in there, that person could still be invited.
Right? Yeah, I don't know.
But I'm gathering that we might have a little manipulating to do on this particular one. Are you comfortable with that? I mean, rewriting it?
With leaving it out or changing it? No, I'm very comfortable with changing it. Yeah, this is just a recommendation and a starting point for us based on.
I get a sense that most people would be willing to take it by committee, not everybody, not all the committees, but one committee, if that is the situation, with the option of getting the full board involved if it's pretty loose.
If it's super egregious and you have to, then you get the whole board, and then that's when the consequences really start.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, well,
I guess personally, I would like to see the suspension maybe dealt with at the full board level.
all of them?
Yeah. Instead of each individual chair trying to deal with that. I mean, if the behavior is that outrageous, I think every board member should be able to weigh in on that.
I could respond to that. One opportunity, I think, if we did do it at the board level, not only would there likely be a board meeting before the next committee meeting, the board together could potentially decide this is a committee-only suspension or this is a full suspension, and that could weigh in
Right.
opinions from and this, if we were to strike just a portion of a sentence in here, it would give that presiding officer the opportunity to make that recommendation to the board. So you could kind of make the recommendation that you want.
Right.
Right.
And we'd have that next board meeting, assuming it didn't happen at a board meeting. And if it did, we would come back around as a group. So it might be better to do it that way, just to.
I like that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So quite simply, there's a second sentence that says the suspension must be approved by a majority of the board or committee at which the most recent incident occurred. We could simply strike or committee at which the most recent incident occurred.
Okay. The intention here was to make this an action item. I think we have a couple modifications to make to it. Really just, I think, in this last one. Right. Did we have that? Yes.
So we moved one item based on Mr. McCaffrey's recommendation.
You could what?
We moved one item just in order based on Mr. McCaffrey's recommendation.
Yes.
And then struck out a half of a sentence in item 4.
Yeah, so we could vote on it as presented.
Pardon?
We could vote on it. It's agendized, right? Yeah, so we could vote on it.
Yes, we can vote on it.
With those changes that we made. And then
Yes.
what the full board has to say.
That's correct. Vote.
I think Greg has a question.
Patrick, would you be okay with moving K to letter A? I mean, just so it's right out front. I mean,
Yeah, no, I think it should be,
just so, as soon as you start reading it, you
Yeah,
kind of
no.
know what.
we could do that too, for sure. Yeah, it's just got to, it can't be buried on K because, but we could move it up to,
Well, you could put it in A, or you could put it where we were talking
yeah,
about,
or you could put it in E.
where it would be cohesive with the
Put it in E,
subject of
yeah.
timing.
Yeah, because I wanted that kind of everything together.
Okay, that's fine.
So there's no, so they're not looking back to say, when they read this, they're looking back, well, how long is the public comment? And they're looking
Yeah.
around for it.
I think that's a good
That's why I
place.
wanted to move it,
Okay. I'm fine.
because
with
I had
that.
to look around for it.
I'm fine with that.
Okay,
I just have one other question.
go ahead.
Someone would then have to pull together an announcement for all committee chairs or the board president to read that would reflect this policy if and when it was passed. That would just be something down the road that we would have to
We
look
do
at.
that.
Yeah. I think that's really needed
This
because.
would be a policy, we rewrote how we were going to deal with policies and the consent agenda, et cetera. Like, this one would be a board, one, we will visit the board with this one. Joel? Yeah.
And that's in here. It would just be something that would have to be done in the future.
It will be.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody?
I'm
Move
good.
approval of policy 0167.3 as presented.
Second that.
Seconded. Further discussion? Seeing none? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0. So, Julie, I almost said Lynn. Sorry.
And thank you, Dr. Piazza,
Yes,
for all your hard
yes.
work behind the scenes, and Dr. Cook as well. I think that,
And for providing it.
yes, it gave us the chance
a
to
way to get-
reflect on that at home and to,
Appreciate that.
I think, make a better policy. So I appreciate your time.
Okay, let's put that one aside then. We have a number of information discussion items. 5320, I got to get my papers straight now. 5320 immunizations. Some questions were left on that one, I believe.
A request to bring immunizations and health services and emergency nursing services forward for discussion.
Well, we wanted to, yes, we talked about more or
about
less
all three
combining
of them,
these. Yes, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Thank you. You did share that with me. So we have 5320, 5310, and 531001.
We did include some statutory language around, what supports these policies. At the end of each policy that you see, generally you'll see a legal reference. And so we brought forward some of the legal references on these policies, just for the committee's consideration, eyes, information.
So what were the discussion points, Anthony?
Well, my initial bringing this up, I think it's been 2 committee meetings ago, was at the current time, the subject of the COVID vaccine, the EUA, was foremost on people's minds, whether or not we were going to mandate that or have clinics on school grounds. And I believe that has been mostly answered and addressed already. The only remaining point that I had mentioned at the last board was, do we need an additional policy or some changing to this policy for future shots like the COVID shot that has not been fully approved by the FDA as a vaccine, as we would call all the other vaccines we know of. So I know other districts have done that. I know people have come in to me and said, hey, does this policy fully apply to that? I don't know. From my reading of it, it may not. So I think the reason why it's still on the agenda is, do we need to further look at this from a policy standpoint? So I don't know if... Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dr.
so
Cook.
in 20 years of education now, this has been the only time where a vaccine has, kind of come to the surface. Could we face something in the future? Yes. The general immunization rules in the state, the things that cover vaccines, the state looks for school districts to have 99% compliance with the vaccine rules, which means that 99% of your kids are either vaccinated or are vaccinated with a waiver around a health concern, a religious concern, or a personal conviction. So it doesn't mean that 99% of your kids have to be vaccinated. It does defer to family choice as to how you want to do that. Our obligation is to make sure that if you have a conviction that says my child will not be vaccinated, or there's a health condition that says my child will not be vaccinated, that we just get the waiver from you as a parent that says, we're opting this, we're waiving out of this. And that's where that's the reporting requirement that the school district has. So there isn't an expectation that kids are vaccinated. It's just that, we have to be compliant with that component of the statute.
So we're saying, in writing, we're only saying the things that we have to do.
Yeah, we have to either have a 99% vaccine rate, or just for numbers purposes, right? I'm not saying it. 90% of the kids are vaccinated and the other 9% are waived due to one of the mentioned reasons.
And other elements that come up, we don't touch.
We don't require the flu shot. We don't require those other ones. It's just what our reporting requirement is. As of this conversation, the state hasn't said that the COVID vaccine is in that list of things that we must monitor, just like the flu vaccine isn't in the list of things that we must monitor. It's really that childhood series that kids get around the diseases that are out there.
Patrick, sorry.
Do you have that list in policy or in that they require?
We don't have the list spelled.
Okay.
I don't believe it's spelled out specifically, but
Okay, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
I know that at one time they required the smallpox vaccine and that went away, so I was just wondering if we have the list and update it as the requirements change. No. Okay. So parents know.
yeah, no, I can
obviously
certainly
they
look
know.
for it,
No,
but
I
I'm
was
trying to
just
find it in
wondering, 'cause
policy.
I was looking for it. I couldn't find it either.
I couldn't find it either, and I don't believe that it's spelled out other than,
Okay.
that when we run this, when we do this work, we are working with a vaccine registrar at the state
Yeah.
level. So when
Yeah.
you go get your shot, it goes to the state, and then that information is present. So we get that list of kids, and then when we don't see names, then we have to cross-reference that and then
Okay.
reach out to
I got you.
parents. And it's a
No,
very
I
laborious
understand.
process to make sure we get those waivers. We have been non-compliant with that. We've, been as low as like 92% and as high as 98.5%. We've been very close, but it takes a lot of work out of our nurses and health room assistants just to get those waivers covered.
Yeah, right.
That's a universal list for the state, right?
Right, and that's not unique to the school district of Waukesha. That's every public school district, and
Is that a state requirement or a federal requirement?
I believe it's a state requirement.
So other states could have different requirements?
Might have, yeah.
They could.
I know other states have them, but I don't know if they're the same.
If they're the same, and the shots, the vaccines are the same, or is that a federal requirement? The vaccines, the type of vaccine, so.
For polio, for
Does
shot.
the Fed tell DPI these are the vaccines that you should be requiring?
I don't believe so. I think that a lot of that it just houses in state statute. There may be a lot of commonality across the country.
Yeah, that's what I
around
was
those,
wondering.
But
Greg, sorry.
Is there a penalty for the district if we don't meet 99% compliance?
just fall in the list of monitoring that
Okay.
we fall on. I mean, it's not, there's no DPI jail in that case, so, yeah,
Administrative pain and
it's the
suffering.
administrative pain and suffering associated with it, but it's not, it's in the grand scheme of things that we need to monitor. It's a lot of work to make sure we, dot our i's and cross our t's, but, once that's done, you just get a follow-up letter that says you're compliant or you're not compliant.
But you really strive.
We strive to get to that
To get that,
99% rate, but, I mean, we haven't made it in a very long time.
So students can't be excluded from school.
There are exclusions, and those are generated usually at the, we work closely with the county health department on these things. So there are layers in it. And we will send notices of possible exclusion, but there's limits as to how long a kid could be excluded and at what grade levels they could be excluded at.
Okay.
That goes into statute and goes to county health department regulations.
Okay, thank you.
We also had under this grouping, health services and emergency nursing services. Is there something that somebody has with those? Anthony?
These next two they were both something that I had brought up at the time of the immunization discussion, and really, I think just for clarification more than anything, in the health services policy, there is the term invasive physical examination, and perhaps the best thing maybe would be just to explain an example or why that's there.
Yeah, if we
I think it's scary, and that's why.
Right. If we bring doctors on site to do sports physicals, I think it was 2 policy committee meetings ago, we had this discussion, and Dr. Siebert and I were not aware of any of that. And then it was shortly thereafter it was brought to our attention that South High School was bringing doctors in from Children's to do physicals. There's parental consent associated with those. The parents are notified ahead of time, so the practice is in line with what the policy is, but that is an invasive exam to make sure kids are healthy enough to participate in athletics. In that particular case, there was no discussion, and it wasn't a vaccine clinic in any way, shape, or form. It was really to make sure kids were healthy enough to play sports.
And there was another question around that of COVID testing, and I think we talked about that last time, is this could require or be a policy that would allow that type of testing to take place.
Correct. I mean, for any level of testing that we would be doing on site, we are limited in policy as to the types of screenings that we can do, and that's in the health services policy that talks about physical exams for head lice, fever, rash, et cetera, where we would be able to look at a child's skin, check their hair, take a temperature. Dental examinations, we do partner with groups to come in and do dental exams. We do have vision screenings that come on site, and then the audiometric, the hearing screening. So those are the ones that in policy we can do. They're generally very helpful for our kids and our parents because it is on site. The invasive medical exam piece is the one there's a higher standard there, and there's a notice and everything like that we have to do for that. But COVID testing would be something that we would have to bring forward to you as a board to say, this is what we would be proposing.
And right now, that's not an issue.
We're.
Patrick?
Is you would have to bring it forward because it requires parental permission? Because, and the only reason I ask that is because it says the district shall specify the need for health services which may include but not limited to.
Right, we would have
So
to.
could you add, my question is, can you add something to that list because it says but not limited to?
We would, that would be a policy exemption that we would have to come to you to get a policy exemption on.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Okay.
Okay? Caught up on these first three? Thank you. Good stuff to bring back. Okay, now we have policy 9140, Citizens Advisory Committees.
So there was a request a month or two ago to come forward with just some information and our policies that talk about the committees that we have in the school district. So we have the board policy 01, it's the bylaw 0155 that talks about the board committee structure, the TNL, FNF, policy, HR. We have a Citizens Advisory Committee. We've attached the policy 9140 for review, and it talks about the conditions that the superintendent and the board could use to create a Citizens Advisory Committee and the certain rules that we would have to follow should that happen in and around, what gets posted publicly, what is not a public meeting. We have complaints concerning educational materials. So we have a consideration committee. This was used, I believe it was 7 or 8 years ago, to look at some books that were in our libraries, selections that we had available for students. We have a policy on open meetings for non-board committees. So there's a policy in there that addresses, what open meetings requirements we would have if it was a district committee, but not necessarily a board-directed committee. We have the Human Growth and Development Committee. That is ingrained in statute. It talks about committee membership there for the purposes of considering the human growth and development curriculum, the sex ed curriculum that we would use in the district. And I think that covers all of the committees.
Patrick.
I do have one question. So under Citizens Advisory Committees, we had that discussion about who forms them and all that we discussed, and it says here, the structure and organization of an advisory committee shall be determined by the board as appropriate to the assignment. Does that mean the board has to approve the organization of the superintendent's advisory committee? I'm just wondering because that was a discussion that we had at the board, who determines the structure of Dr. Siebert's.
Yeah, and so that would be an administrative held committee.
Okay.
That would be that is a non-board committee.
Okay.
If the board directed Dr. Siebert to form a committee, then you're starting to fall into what this policy is, where it's
Okay.
a citizens advisory.
I
So
gotcha.
say, for instance, we were looking at, using a new type of asphalt for our playgrounds.
Right.
And the FNF committee directed Dr. Siebert or Darren Clark to, you guys go study this and get some parents involved, then you're starting to get into a more formal committee structure at that point.
Okay.
Whereas if Darren decided to look at multiple things before he came to FNF,
Right.
then it would be an administrative health committee where parents are coming in and he's reporting out.
Okay, so 9140 is only for committees that are requested to be from the board.
Corrected,
Yes,
correct.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. That took care of item D. Oh, Kelly, I'm sorry. No, that's quite all right.
Almost.
Okay.
I'll be quick. I think obviously we've got a lot that covers a lot of what we want to do. There's citizens advisory, there's board directed committees, there's committees of board members. I think we kind of got all these on the table because, and I don't want to get to substance of the committee, but the district equity leadership team kind of doesn't fit any of these molds. And also, I don't think we want to get in the way of superintendent's advisory committee. So I think it's important for us as a board and collectively with the leadership to know how do we work around these things, right? And what is the appropriate model for certain types of activities that have a significant influence on either the vision or the messaging of the district, where, something like, us weighing in on, I don't know, it's an interesting example, but an asphalt committee would be might be a board-directed activity, and it just seems so much less important maybe than some of the things that our equity leadership team are focused on, right? So how do we get that balanced, I guess, is what I'm looking for. Because I think we've got the models here that can give us the operations and the transparency that we want. It just doesn't fit any of these. And maybe that's not a discussion for the policy committee. Maybe we are saying we've got what we need, but.
Well, you raise a good issue, and maybe it isn't for the policy committee, but I think the answer lies in communications, district-wide communications. And I have a certain amount of empathy with people that are brand new to the board, because stuff is happening all the time that some of us remember and hear about, and we put it in the back closet someplace because it's just, not that big a deal. But you have particularly, a reason to be wondering about some things, and I think that's good and legitimate. I guess the point being, in my mind, the point being is to get as much communication from Jim or other committee members or whatever it is, so that we are helping you understand what some of that stuff is that's going on. Because there's a lot of stuff out there that sometimes that's not. I don't want to use the word hidden, because that sounds like we're purposely hiding stuff, but it just doesn't show up until somebody asks about it. And those are the things that when somebody. I had some of those pop up because of that piece I have on the agenda where I'm supposed to give reports on charter schools and all the rest of that stuff. Some of that stuff, the other 8 members have never heard about. So I try and remember to get those things out. Whether that's an adequate response or not, I don't know. But I don't see it as a policy issue as much as it is a communications issue. That's my view. Anthony?
In my reading of all the committee policies that are in front of us, if we were to cobble them all together, and I think this goes to Dr. Piasek's point, we could arrive at what the district equity leadership team is doing. But with any one given policy, we cannot get there. And as to your point of reporting, I think it's a very valid one. Over the past year, it doesn't seem that there's been much reporting from that team to the board. When I've delved into these policies, it would seem to me that that particular entity is not in compliance with what the board policies state. And it's not an administrative committee. It's not a board committee. It's not an advisory committee. It's pieces of all 3 of those things. And if it were just something simple and basic, like putting in a parking lot, nobody would, as to your point, Mr. Baumgart, nobody would know. Probably nobody would care. We know it would get taken care of. But in this case, it is driving the direction of the district. And I think it's very important that we get a handle on it, and I think in the policy committee we can define what that is. And if I could go back for just a minute, we just spoke of policy 8309. And in the back of that policy, there's the last paragraph is the meetings of school district staff. Now, in previous conversations, we asked where the administrative committees fall. And we understand that in daily operations of the district, there must be administrative committees of all kinds that do that work and meet. Is this paragraph here, under meetings of school district staff, is that somewhat defined what an administrative committee is currently under policy?
Yeah, and I guess before I would look at the last paragraph, I mean, I would look through evaluating a group status as a committee, and perhaps that's a step that needs to be taken, because there are, I think it's 10 bullet points here through M. I apologize for not counting up the letters, but, looking at what the function is, how did the committee start? Where did it start? Did it start at the board level? Was it directed in policy or by an action of the board? Did the superintendent form it, or is it informally developed at the building or the department level? So just going through and answering those questions, team by team, committee by committee, council by council, as far as what goes on a day-to-day basis in schools, yes or no, who did it, what's their purpose, and then determining, does that essentially fit the definition of what is a committee by the nature of this policy? And if it does fall into that category, are you then obligated under the open meetings laws to address things from an open meeting standpoint? I mean, a lot of the language in this policy came from a case out of the Appleton School District during, I believe it was a curriculum development cycle, where they had an internal committee that was considering curriculum. They weren't following the open meetings laws, and it ended up getting challenged based off of the curriculum that was selected. But it was set out to establish curriculum. So you have to get into the purpose, and these questions help us get there. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. To your point, if I take policy 8309 and I go through those questions of evaluating a group or a group status as a committee under the open meetings laws, and I apply those to the district equity leadership team, I come up with, and I may be wrong on a few of these, I come up with about 3 no's, a couple of maybes, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11, 12 yeses. And so my concern is this committee is somewhat defined as an official committee, not only, but probably one that needs to be meeting under the open meetings laws in how I read this policy. So again, when I say, I'm cobbling all these together to come to the definition, I think we need a policy that either defines a team or the team needs to be melded into one of these policies. It probably most closely fits Policy 9140, which is the Citizens Advisory Committee, but there's a few places there where it's vastly inefficient to meet that criteria. So I think that's certainly my concern, and that's, in looking at all these, I think we need to decide how the board policies will be followed in committees that are really newly created. How are we going to fit them into policy?
Dr. Siebert, you're going to control that? Because the question that's being raised is a legitimate question, as whether that particular organization is fitting within the policy, and I think we need to address that one way or the other. So, and whether that involves me and Joe or anybody else, you let us know. For sure. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Greg.
Dr. Siebert, at this point, where would you say that the district equity leadership team falls? Do they fall within any of these groups, or is it a combination, or what would be your answer to that?
Well, it was a group. It's a
because I know you didn't form the committee.
Right.
The group.
I would say it was. If
Is
you
it a
looked at
team?
how it
Is
was
it a
created,
committee?
it was created at the department level.
Okay.
So by the director of equity and educator development, with then the support of the assistant superintendent of teaching and learning and myself. So I would say it would be most closely related to number 4. However, I can see where it maybe doesn't fit, and we haven't gone through all of these questions in looking at it. So I think that would be, to Dr. Cook's point and Mr. Zenobia, is a good exercise for us to go through and then figure out where it fits, how it fits, if it fits, and then be able to report back to this body.
Thank you.
Is it referred to as team or committee right now? Okay, okay. Thank you. And thanks for the follow-up on that.
Okay. We have a F and a G yet. Okay. 5511, Joe, dress and grooming.
Yeah, there was a request made to look into the dress and grooming policy for students. And so the board, policy has 4 items in it that, we need to consider when we develop our handbooks for students around dress and grooming, and present a hazard to the health or safety of students or the school, interfere with schoolwork, create disorder, disrupt the educational program, cause excessive wear or damage to school property, prevent the student from achieving his or her own educational objectives because of blocked vision or restricted movement. So that's in the scope of what is in a dress code, what is in our dress code policy. There's the expectation that we will be having a handbook then, building level policy that enforces what this is. And so I met with high school administration 2 times to review the dress code policy and to discuss the implementation of the policy in schools. And the administration at our high schools felt universally that the policy that we have in place supports the work that they do in schools. Their questions came more, or their concern came more around what does actual classroom level enforcement of the policy look like. So for instance, a student who would have on a shirt that would not fully cover them. The issue is not so much when that happens during first period, because oftentimes parents will see their kids leave their house one way or another, and parents may be off at work and they don't see their kid. When the first period teacher addresses it, it's not an issue over the course of the school day. The kid is brought in, they're just, talked to, it's changed. What happens is when that starts popping up 3rd, 4th, and 5th period, and you start to see those, the inconsistencies, either that it wasn't addressed or that the outer shirt, the button-up shirt on the outside, it gets warm in the school, that comes off, and then there's a more revealing undershirt that is now the outer shirt. So those are the issues that they deal with more on a regular basis in schools. Oftentimes it's a corrective conversation with the student. Sometimes it's honestly, in some instances, it can be class period dependent. So for instance, if you're sitting down in your English class and, you look one way in the English class, but if you move into a science lab and your body's in a different position, just the body position of a student can change that. We do have some general rules. We don't allow midriff, the exposed stomach in shirts. We don't allow the sleeves to be cut off. Nothing to promote alcohol or tobacco or drugs in any way, shape, or form. Those are universally addressed. We need to make sure that the policy by nature isn't discriminatory in any way, shape, or form. We do run into some challenges in the use of the policy because depending on the time of the year and the attire present, sometimes it gets a little bit out of balance with midriff shirts or sleeveless shirts or whatever it might be. The administration all agreed that they need to make sure that they put this on the top of the list of things that they continue to work with their staff on, constantly reminding them to make sure that they enforce it during the first period of the day, make sure that they're taking care of it after the lunch period, because again, those were times of the day where they started to see some inconsistencies. First period teacher doesn't talk about it, or you've got first period PE and then you're sweaty and then you go into second period and you're still wearing your gym clothes. I mean, there was just a lot of variables that play into this.
Anything else on that? I don't have any suggestions or questions.
Having had to implement it as a high school assistant principal, it was a very tricky policy in another school district to implement, for all of the things that can happen over the course of the school day. I mean, it would be ideal if everybody showed up, if like a Waukesha North student showed up in the morning and they're wearing a Waukesha North t-shirt and it was, down to the elbow and it covered up the neck and it fit perfectly. Like that would just be ideal, kind of the uniform situation, but we don't have uniforms and not everybody shows up with the Waukesha North, South, West shirt and we have to deal with dress code issues then.
So you're not suggesting uniforms?
Motion
huh?
for
I
uniform.
don't want to, that would be a great
didn't say that.
citizens advisory council
There you
committee to discuss that.
Patrick?
Does each school?
They don't.
Sorry.
Oh,
No.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I was getting waved at. So does each school in their handbook address it differently?
We have a uniform handbook at the middle and the high school level. So what you see in the North handbook and what you see at the South handbook is consistent language around dress. Again, the inconsistency happens in the practical application of the policy.
And what does gym class look like? And the only reason I asked that is because about 10 or 12 years ago, we had a complaint about the swimming portion of gym class and
Would
the
have to-
attire that some of the students
to-
were wearing.
I would have to look into that.
I just wonder
as
if
to
that's-
it's, what the expectation
Yeah,
is.
right.
But
Because it was just a conversation and it was fixed.
yeah, I haven't heard any issues
okay.
around swimming class.
Okay.
The biggest issue we face around dress or grooming is, if I could generally say it, it's middle school boys after third period or fourth period gym class who have to spend the rest of the day after sweating in school. And most of those complaints came from Les Paul on the third and fourth floor,
Right.
where there was no air conditioning at the time. Hopefully the last referendum project remedies that for us and the AC helps.
Okay.
And we did have a school with uniforms, if you recall.
Not at high school.
Nope. White Rock had uniforms.
Oh, yes, I remember that, yeah.
Does our health services policy allow administration of deodorant?
Yeah, right, exactly. I don't know.
Teachers do highly encourage it.
If I could just offer just one additional comment, and I don't know that there's an easy solution for this, frankly, I don't think there is one, but I think Ms. Reinachek had brought this up at the broader board meeting, and it came to this committee, but one of the things that she and I had talked about noticing over the last couple of years is just that the shorts are getting a lot shorter, and skirts and things like that, and that is not, it's going to be a administrator's choice, right? What battle are you going to pick that day about what piece of clothing? But
Yeah, and again, it comes down to what is going to be brought to your attention, because one time in one of the school districts I worked in, we had to do a locker sweep because of a bomb threat at a middle school. And when we went locker by locker and checked all of the lockers, you found a bag in the locker that had dirty clothes, a bag in the locker that had clean clothes in it, and what you could discern from that was kids were coming to school dressed one way and then changing. So what our administrators shared with us is that they will get these dress issues, but when they call home, it's, you can run into, I think my child is wearing appropriate clothes to school, all the way to, well, when they left the house this morning, they were wearing jeans. And so they do follow up on those things when it's brought to their attention, but again, if it happens during the appropriate period of the day, the first period, whatever, you're catching it. It's the inconsistencies that they believed were the issues. First period, second period, third period, teacher let it go. Fourth period, teacher follows the policy. It's the middle of the day. Why are you calling me out on it now? So it was that practical application piece that they felt was more of an issue for them in the enforcement of this.
This is a historic problem. I mean, I can go back a lot more years than anybody else in this room and tell you what's going on then. Still struggling with it. But the nuns took care of part of that problem. Okay.
Could I just ask?
I'm sorry, Greg.
Is there anything in the handbook that addresses that, to be a little bit more specific?
Such as like what's too revealing, or
Yes.
I'd have to look at what the handbooks specifically say.
Okay.
In one of my prior districts, just to use as an example, there was a statement in there. There was a no cleavage policy written in, and then that was found to be discriminatory because it really only affected female students. So you'd have to look at, like, to what degree is the leg being covered?
Right.
Is mid-thigh appropriate? Is it just above the knee? Is it just below the knee? So that it could be applied to both male and female students.
And I'm just
Don't know
asking
if we have
because,
that level of specificity.
right, just asking because there's no way to enforce it if it's not
Correct. It's
somehow addressed or spelled out. I mean,
There's also a lot of layers on top of that when you look at the certain like sports
it,
uniforms.
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
sports uniforms, which are, part of your participation, if you applied those same standards to say like prior district volleyball shorts were an issue,
Right.
like the volleyball uniform or the cheerleading uniform,
Sure.
you'd say this is in your handbook, but then you're expecting people to wear this to the game. And that again becomes a problem.
I think the request would be just to check and just.
I'll follow
maybe-
up on that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, item G, discussion of board meeting venue including.
Yeah, there was a request to look at, we talked, I think it was last month or the month prior, about if we had large crowds, what would we consider from a venue standpoint? Based off of what we have, our types of policies. Really, the only areas where we mention a venue or we mention a location is in the posting of the regular meeting, the notice of the regular meetings, special meetings, and then the change of regular meetings. So that would identify a location, but we bring it forward as a discussion item tonight. And
Looking for discussion, Greg?
Is that something that was going to be looked at through technology?
I think Steve Schloman was looking at like the costs of upgrading this room and then the costs of
Right.
having the board roadshow.
And the feasibility of all that and, okay.
Yeah, it gets into some issues. Not too many years ago, we did, on alternating months, we would go to one of the school buildings for that board meeting.
Yep, went to Retzer, we've been at Retzer. we've
And,
been at-
and several of the other places as
Central,
well.
yeah.
And to maintain any kind of a technology system that's been able to take that out to the public is just, didn't fly.
That was a major operation.
Yes.
So Mr. Sloman is on, or looking into that.
We have more technology available today. There's no question about it, but I don't have an answer yet, so.
Right. Okay, he's looking into it.
He is looking into
We'll
the
come back
costs.
with some recommendations or something, or,
He would come back with costs. I don't know
Okay.
to what degree we would.
Okay.
From a policy standpoint or a board discussion, there might be
Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you.
considerations for the venue.
Kelly, do you have something?
Yep. Just related to, so he did present some costs at the last TNL meeting that was related to this room and the remote rooms as well.
right.
He thought it would be about the same or the same equipment. I think we were talking about not necessarily a road show, but possibly a alternate permanent or alternate venue, something that would be a little bit bigger. Based on the policies that we have, though, really it sounds like we have the flexibility to hold the meetings wherever we want, as long as we appropriately post and notify the public. And I mean, I don't think it's a good idea to move it around because then people can't find us. But and there certainly are some committees that don't need a large venue most of the time. So.
Okay, that was basically the last piece, other than recommendations for the future meeting. Joe, do we have something specific coming up that's,
We are getting the release for the new policy updates will be coming soon. We had our new Neola consultant reach out to us
Right.
today. And once that release comes out, he will schedule a meeting with me and Julie to, review it in its entirety and take a look at what we have. And then we'll start to get that parsed out into future policy committee meetings for the committee to consider.
okay? Other than that, we have no other business. Anthony?
Just a recommendation for future meeting
Sure.
policy. I like to look at 2240, which is controversial issues in the classroom.
Writing, thank you. Okay, anything else? We'll bring that for discussion next. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.